With all the basketball tournaments, I'm always looking to see who wins their conference tournament, because is there another team in their conference that has a better record or should be going to the tournament, and they still might get in, and that's going to knock somebody out or put somebody on the bubble. And that's why we have people like Seth Davis from CBS and Sports Illustrated, Road to the Final Four. He joins us now. If you're looking at some of the surprises so far and the impact they'll have on Sunday, where would you start?
Well, I wouldn't call them surprises so much, Dan, as disappointments. I mean, you've just had a number of bubble teams who have really hurt their cause. I mean, the team that really comes to mind is Northwestern. You know, I think that even if Northwestern had beaten Minnesota, and even if they had defeated Michigan, they still might have needed one more to make sure they got into the tournament. The Pac-12 has obviously been down all year and has been a disaster as of late. You know, Washington won the league by a game, but then they ended the season with a loss at UCLA and then a devastating loss in the opening round of the Pac-12 tournament, the final round of the Pac-12 tournament. And, same for Arizona losing at Arizona State. And so it just seems like a lot of these quote-unquote power conference schools are trying to play themselves out, which is why if I were on the committee, of course I'm not, I would favor a team like Drexel. You know, here's a team that won a pretty good league in the Colonial, maybe not as good as it's been. It's a little bit deceiving because they were fortunate not to have to play VCU or George Mason on the road, but they did sweep Old Dominion. Winning at the Old Dominion is not easy to do. They won 19 consecutive games, and then they lost in the finals to VCU by 3 points. To me, that's an NCAA tournament team. But it's hard when you look at their overall strength of schedule, Dan. If they got a bid, they would have the lowest overall strength of schedule of any team that's ever gotten in that large. So it's kind of dicey when you compare teams from different conferences.
But if you're looking at what will play out over the next couple of days and how that will affect Selection Sunday, is there anything of any great magnitude that's really going to have a strong impact here?
Well, my conversations with people on the committee in the NCAA, Dan, lead me to believe that people like myself overrate what happens in the conference tournament. You know, it's not just because it happens right before Selection Sunday doesn't mean that it's more important. However, when teams have a chance to make a case or not make a case, for example, Texas. You know, Texas is a team that they've played better lately. They're a young team. They've gotten better. They got some significant wins, and then they beat Iowa State yesterday on a neutral court. I mean, that to me is significant. Now, if they lose to Missouri, how do you punish a team for losing to Missouri? I think Texas has made a pretty strong case. I would have them in the tournament. So I do think we tend to overrate what happens in the conference tournaments, but in the overall scheme of things, when things are that close between these bubble teams, I think it's natural to look at what they've done over the last 3-4 weeks.
I was watching the Pac-12.
Sorry to hear that.
No, I enjoyed it. I love watching Stanford against Arizona State. Did you watch any of that?
You know what? I got a T-vote. As soon as I hang up, I promise I'm going to watch it beginning to end.
Oh, you can't have that East Coast bias. No, I love
basketball bias. There's a lot of good basketball being played out west, by the way. Look at the West Coast Conference and the Mountain West. There are good teams out there. They're just not in the Pac-12. That's all.
How does that happen? Pac-12 is really bad, and then you have Washington bowing out against Oregon State. It's just one of those years. It's just a coincidence.
Well, it's one of those quadrennials, I guess. I mean, it's been a couple of years for them. First of all, they did add Colorado and Utah into the league purely for football reasons, and those were two not only non-traditional basketball schools. I know Utah had the run with Majerus, but that was a long, long time ago. They're in particularly bad straits now, though Colorado ended up having a decent year. You had some freak things happening in the league with the turnover. The end of the Lute Olson situation. You had the penalties and all the depletions at USC. UCLA is going through some struggles, having lost a lot of guys. So it's a down cycle, but it's been a big down cycle. And I will say this, and my colleague Greg Anthony I think makes a great point about this. We always used to think about the Pac-10, the old Pac-10, West Coast basketball athletes, up and down, run and gun, fast break. If you look at the styles now in this league, you mentioned Arizona Arizona State, Washington State, USC slows it down. Oregon State runs the Princeton offense. I mean, and UCLA, Ben Howland runs, kind of a half-court managed, use all your timeouts type of system. Then maybe it's not so fun to play there, especially to those athletes out west. So maybe some coaches in the league need to think about playing a little bit more entertaining style of basketball, which in turn I think helps recruiting.
He's Seth Davis from Sports Illustrated, CBS, covers college basketball, be part of the road to the Final Four for CBS, joining us, Dan Patrick Show. So your Final Four, or I should say your top 4 seeds.
Top 4 seeds, I would think would be pretty consistent across the board. You've got Kentucky is your overall number 1, followed by Syracuse, Kansas, and then North Carolina. So your wild cards are, what if Duke wins the ACC tournament? I think they'd have a very strong case to get to the top line because both Michigan State and Ohio State kind of stumbled down the stretch a little bit. So whoever wins that conference tournament, I think, is going to be a half a step behind Duke. And remember now, again, all things being equal, Duke did beat Michigan State, way back in November, but it does count. So that could be a difference maker.
I mentioned yesterday to Shaka Smart that the rumors are that he could end up at Illinois, and then Bruce Weber gets fired.
Start the clock.
Yeah. Well, Shaka Smart will eventually go to a bigger school. He gets VCU back in the dance, and it might be a nice parting gift to say, all right, I gave you back-to-back, and now I'm going to go to a bigger school. You see that scenario, or who would be in line for this Illinois job? How good is that Illinois job?
I think it's one of the top. If it's not one of the top 5 jobs in the country, Dan, it's one of the top 10 jobs. I mean, it's a great brand. It's in a perfect location. The only downside, no disrespect, is the town of Champaign is not a classic college town like a Madison and Ann Arbor, Bloomington, Athens, what you think of a great college town. But, there's players galore in that part of the country, great fan support. Clearly, I think it's going to be Shaka's to either take or turn down. A couple of things. First of all, there is considerable talk around Illinois about hiring an African-American. They've never had it in basketball or football, so there's considerable pressure there. Also, Shaka Smart has a long-standing relationship with the athletic director, Mike Thomas. They were actually both at the University of Akron together. In fact, I called Shaka because I heard that Mike Thomas actually introduced Shaka to his wife. And I called Shaka. I said, "Is that true?" He said, "No. There was another woman who worked there who introduced us." But he has that long-standing relationship. And the thing about Shaka is, and I really respect him for this, he had some opportunities last year. Whether it was North Carolina State or some other jobs that were opening up right off of the Final Four. And I really felt like that. And I know this from talking to him. He felt like, here are these people at VCU. They gave me a chance to get a job. We had this incredible miracle Cinderella run, first four to the Final Four. If I had come home from all that and the parades and all the reception, and then a day later or 2 days later gone to all my kids and say, hey, I'm parlaying this now to a bigger paycheck, I think he felt uncomfortable about that. My sense is he won't feel as uncomfortable. My sense is that, given what I was just saying about the style of playing the Pac-12, it's especially true in the Pac-10. I think he would do a great job. I know that there's a lot of talk about Chris Collins, who's obviously from the area.
Yeah.
I think, for Chris Collins, to me, Dan, is interesting because it would be similar to Roy Williams going to Kansas. Roy Williams was the number 3 assistant at North Carolina. No one knew who the heck he was. Chris Collins, obviously with his dad, having grown up in Chicago, his dad having coached the Chicago Bulls, anytime Duke recruits a player from the Midwest or Illinois or Chicago, Chris is the point man there. I definitely think he's ready for that kind of a job. So those seem to be the 2 names that pop up the most, but I think it's Shaka's right now to turn down.
One other thing with the point-shaving scandal at Auburn, let's go bigger picture here. And how often are you alerted to the possibility of point-shaving scandal?
You don't hear it. I got to say, you always hear about recruiting and what goes on in that netherworld. But, point shaving is kind of its own animal. I mean, a lot of people, including myself, I was snarky on Twitter, this coming from Auburn, don't you have to score points first before you can shave them?
Wow.
If it's going on in Auburn, but I don't know. I mean, everybody's innocent until proven guilty. Just because there's an investigation doesn't mean anything. One thing I do know, Dan, is the computerization of all this is so sophisticated that any odd betting patterns are automatically going to get picked up, almost automatically. So I know that triggers a lot of what they look at. But you really don't hear a lot of this stuff anymore.
Yeah, I was alerted to something earlier this year, but I think it happens a lot more than people think. But
Really?
it's because, just because somebody hears something who hears something, it's that game of telephone. And by the time it gets to you and you go, wait a minute, what happened? And then nothing happened. I didn't hear of any investigations. There was no story that came out of this, but had somebody who sent a couple of emails to say, here's something that's going on. Never came to fruition. Doesn't mean it won't, or maybe they got away with it. I don't know. But
I'll say this: take aside the point shaving, you can't overstate the presence of gambling in a lot of what goes on. I mean, I think a lot of what goes on behind the recruiting, cheating, comes from money that stems from gambling, and by the way, that includes bracket pools, that includes fantasy leagues. I mean, it is ever present in the world of sports, and I'm actually surprised that this kind of thing doesn't happen more.
Good to visit with you. Know you have a busy weekend. We'll check in with you soon. Thank you.
Dan, it's always great fun. Thank you, sir.
All right. Seth Davis. He works for Sports Illustrated and CBS. He'll be in the studio there, road to the Final Four.